Okay, good morning, everybody. Nice to see some of you whose hangovers weren't quite so strong, that you couldn't make it today. Very nice. Welcome to this panel. My name's Rob Young. I'm hosting this talk on behalf of The Wire magazine, one of the media partners of Big Ears Festival. I don't know about you guys, I'm having an amazing time at this festival. It's my first time here. I think Knoxville is coming over in a really great light, culturally and socially and everything else. It's brilliant. This panel is going to be a discussion about Pauline Oliveros, somebody who was a composer and many other things which we'll get onto. I just want to say that we'll have a talk with myself and my guests, and this talk will be followed by an exclusive rock concert featuring the Stones. Yeah, the Stones are in that box there, and you're all invited to pick one up or two up and bang them together. We'll explain more about that in a while. But I will introduce my guests. On my far left, we have Emily Manzo. She's a very eclectic musician and solo artist. She works as a vocalist and pianist, lives in New York. She has a group called Christy and Emily, I believe. She's made all kinds of recordings. She's recorded the songs of Jessica Pavone for Tzaddik Records. She's recorded the Webern songs. She's even done a complete set of Chopin preludes. No doubt other stuff as well. I'm giving some very potted biogs here. But she's taking part at Big Ears in the Julius Eastman Memorial Lecture later today with Jace Clayton and others, and we can mention a bit more about that later too. Next to her is somebody who probably needs very little introduction to the Big Ears audience, Alvin Curran, composer, co-founder of Musica Electronica Viva, who played an amazing set yesterday at the Mill and Mine, formed with Richard Teitelbaum and Frederick Rejewski. He is, like Pauline Oliveros, a former professor of music at Mills College in California, and has lived for many years in Rome, Italy, where he still continues to compose and teach and make music and write. So, please welcome my guests. Thank you. Alvin, I'd like to start by asking you to help us get some sense of who Pauline Oliveros was. I mean, she was born in 1932, just to flesh out some facts. Of course, very sadly died in November last year. She was a composer. She played the accordion. She was a sound artist, a teacher and mentor. She was the inventor of the concept of deep listening, which is a sort of a method of thinking about sound and space and sonic awareness. She's apparently an expert in the martial arts, including a black belt in karate, I believe. The author of 5 books, including Sonic Meditations, and somebody who worked both kind of across the fields of improvisation and composition and music as process. That's just to sort of give a very brief sort of Wikipedia-type outline of what she did. But you're somebody who knew her personally. Could you maybe start by saying, when did you first, can you remember the first time you encountered Pauline?
Yes,
I did warn you. I did warn you.
I remember very well meeting her in New York City, and this must have been in the late 60s, early 70s, when there was a surge a literal surge, a kind of tsunami of musical vitality, not centered largely in New York City and around the city, but also in the whole USA, and it was in many ways bounded on the extreme side by the vitality and attractiveness of the new minimalism, and on the other side by a complete openness to anything. And the openness to anything could include, let's say, what we now know as a form of music which has rooted itself globally on this planet in a non-movement. It doesn't have a real identity as a single movement, but it is, because of its nature, a continuous search for liberation and freedom. And I'm talking about spontaneous music making, otherwise known as improvised music. That is, music based on the moment, music based on a complete rejection of authority. No leaders, no scores, sometimes no knowledge of when to begin or when to end. And these dimensions, these simple dimensions, emerged simultaneously in the work of many American composers in this period. I'm talking now again about these sort of proto-revolutionary times of the late 1960s, when in fact there were protests of and large social upheavals in this country and around the world in the search of forms of liberation from oppressive social and political forces and ideas. So, women's liberation was among the prime, one of the prime and leading forces of this time. The liberation, in the largest sense of the word, of all of the racial groups in this country, namely Afro-Americans. The largest and most forceful was at its prime. And so these two, and also other liberational ideas, some of them based on the ingestion of chemical substances or natural weeds, were making people aware of other dimensions in space and time that they could step in and out of, just like we do when we make music. And it's these elements, both the social, the historical, political, this stream, this coming together of these elements which defined in a certain way the musical activities of some people who then called themselves composers. Now, pretty soon, I think we're going to get into a discussion about what a composer really is. Pauline Oliveros was certainly a composer. She wrote music in a conventional way when she started. And I might point out also, as an accordionist, like many American musicians, like myself, as a pianist, starting off in dance bands, playing, you know, foxtrots and waltzes and tangos and rumbas and all of this kind of thing of the 1940s and 50s. Pauline was indeed steeped in popular music. As an accordionist, she claimed very happily to be, as many of you know, a roving musician. That is, someone that you hired at a party just to walk around and make music. So she had, as I and many other musicians, Terry Riley, Lamont Young, all started in jazz, Philip Glass as well, Steve Reich, I don't know about Meredith, but Meredith makes a form of popular music all her own, which is even danceable. And what I'm getting to is this generational, I'm painting a picture of a generation, a kind of a very broad-stroked picture. A lot of things are left out. But the important thing in Pauline's case is that she entered this life and world as a music maker, as a person engaged in bringing music in every form possible to anybody who would listen to it. Whether it was pure entertainment, as in her youth when she was a youthful accordionist, or as a latter-day maestro of, I think it's maestra, you have to say that in Italian, of a form of transcendental music available to anybody, anywhere, anytime, which she called deep listening. So, going in this, following this immense arc, which has touched all of us, which has touched my life in particular. I'm saying now from my first meetings with her, I believe in and around the Kitchen in New York City. Kitchen was one of the early do-it-yourself performance spaces, which then became a landmark in most of the large cities in the United States. From those early meetings, we found ourselves very much in tune about what we, as under the label, under this banner of an old-fashioned word called composer, we're about to do and we're doing in very uncomposerly ways, because what we did essentially was to uncompose or decompose or discompose the whole concept of musical composition, opening it up to almost unimaginable vistas and horizons. And I think on these words I'm going to stop myself, because I could go on and on with this kind of thing, although I'm not just making this up, this is the real thing. But I want...
Well,
I think I need a question.
I was going to.
I've answered when I met Pauline Oliveros.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to say you talking is kind of the point, but no, thanks for that. I mean, by the time you met her, some of the work that survives from her early years as a composer is very much in the electronic realm, isn't it? I mean, she was a very early adopter of tape composition. I think she had a tape recorder when she was really young. I mean, I forgot to mention, she was, of course, a founder of the San Francisco Tape Music Center, along with people like Morton Subotnick and others, a very influential center of contemporary music practice over there, which kind of eventually became, I think, the music department at Mills, if I'm not mistaken. Didn't it, or at least it was the sort of seed of that, I think.
The San Francisco Tape Center was originally based in San Francisco, but then it was incorporated in at Mills College itself in the music department, and became a landmark, a place, center for essentially for experimental music. Now, let me say something about that word experimental. Traditionally, experimental means, both in science and in other fields, trying something out for which you do not know the outcome, and you look and search and research what might happen if you do this, that, and the other. So today, experimental music has a kind of a negative ring to it, because people really want to know. They want to know about music which is fixed in time and is predictable. And the movement around experimental music, which of course was very much informed and inspired by composers like John Cage, Lou Harrison, David Tudor, and many, many others. This is musicians who were not necessarily improvisers. These were composers who were looking for ways to, again, break down the doors of the compositional process and open them to possibilities, either through chance or other more mystical ways of making unpredictable music. So Pauline was right in the center of this herself. And of course, as a woman in this time, in a men's world, music was, compositional music was a man's world. Electronic music then, which was hardly existing in the 1950s, when Pauline started making music with tape recorders and doing strange modulations of sound, pure sound on tape, was really something extraordinary. That is extraordinary that a woman was creating these works. This is nothing, no longer extraordinary anymore. We've not fully arrived, but we're on the way to arriving in a sense of creative parity in the world. Pauline has fought all her life in in many respects to make this happen. She's a model of that political and social process. So, that said, her work was, again, always under the rubric of composer. And she, as an individual and as a creative person, was looking for ways not to not to throw that word away. It was a perfectly good word, but to find other ways, other spaces, even other times, but mostly other ways and methods of arriving at music making, which was outside and almost uncategorizable as music composition. It was forms of music making which could belong simultaneously to everybody involved. Forms of collective activity And I don't mean the collective activity of the great models of socialism and Marxism, although these were inspirations. The sense of equality, of identity, of renouncing your own individual ego to become part of a larger form, a larger social form that was sounding together. When you see the great orchestras of the world, they're still a marvel today to see 75, 85, 105 musicians all playing together, playing this great repertoire of Western music, these masterpieces of Beethoven, Mozart, Bach, and so on. Pauline was on her way to trying to create a repertoire of music that belonged to nobody, that belonged to everyone, and it was made simultaneously without any authority and by and large without any score. It was made essentially from pure trust. People trusting in one another and people trusting through their ears by listening to one another, listening to themselves. I think I'm gonna again break here for another question.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think you really.
Oh no, that's fine. Well, I had something.
Do you want to make a comment?
Well, I just had something. I'm eager to also hear what he has. I want to just ask.
I'm gonna shut up. No,
Mr. Curran questions.
if you start me, I'm not gonna. I mean, there's no end to this stuff.
Well,
And Greg Saunier can testify to that.
just a moment ago, like to back up for a second, you mentioned something about, her approach being outside, to get outside of this, I think, traditional approach to the composer music, composer performer relationship.
Right.
But I've been thinking a lot about how actually I feel like she's a way of getting back inside again after sitting, now there's this, she's codified, her practice of what you might do to prepare your body and to prepare a meditation practice so that you're listening in a new way. I've actually found it as a performer to be a really powerful exercise whenever you're encountering one of her pieces that are especially not traditional notation, but they're instructions to perform in a group. Or
Right.
I found that after that, then you want to go back to music that you're practicing in a more traditional way, and be in a different headspace about it, and make sure that you're present and that you're not. I don't know. So I had a response to what you were saying about it being outside, but maybe it's a way of getting inside again.
I'd like to. I'm going to comment on your comment. I had this idea earlier, just to simply say of Pauline that she is not only a brilliant composer, because even the non-composed, that is the spontaneously made pieces about which we're about to play, are very rigorous compositions. They have instructions. They're not written notes, but they tell you what to do, and some of them are very, very difficult, like the one we're about to do with the stones, with the rocks. But in the larger musical historical picture, Pauline, in every case, was a classic outsider. That is, someone who lived, of course, with one foot in the door, but with another 2 or 3 feet outside the door, even though she only had 2 feet, of course. So that was her tendency, to always push the envelope, always push at the limits, at the very edges of possibilities. And having concentrated this in this, let's say, lifetime work, which is now known generically as deep listening, it is indeed a meditative process. Like all music is meditative. As soon as you start making a sound, the sound and the body that makes the sound, yourself, whether it's with your voice or with an instrument, is already producing a space which is both inside and outside your body at the same time, and potentially a space which can act, as everyone knows who makes music, as a transport system that's free of charge. It costs nothing. You just get on it. You get on the vehicle and go as far as you can go until that stops. And this is where Pauline operated. I'm not going to call it mystical, transcendental, spiritual. It was all of the above and none of the above, because all of these things are a part of any music making, in any form, in any culture. Whether you're literally banging on a can, or clicking rocks, or just put your hands on a vibrating pane of glass and just feel these sub vibrations, these incredibly low vibrations that are coming from movement in the outside air. And all of this is concern to us today. The traditional, and this brings us to this confrontation in Pauline's work especially, between composing and improvising. Improvising is music made al fresco. It's music made in the instant, in the moment. And you don't have any time to look back, and you've got a lot of time to look forward, but the forward is always right under your fingers and hands and eyes, and that becomes the past very quickly. So the process of musical decision and sonic production, what you're sounding, whether it's your body, your voice, an instrument, or even your mind in silence, these things are opening up this view of spontaneous music making. Is not a new way of making music at all. It may be one of the oldest ways in human experience. But it is opening a challenge to the entire tradition of composed music which came before it. So I say a challenge because it's another way of making music. Originally, in my youth, the great American jazz music, which is of course largely improvised, but almost always based on a melody, a tune, a set of chords, a progression, a riff, or some other musical form or fragment, was beginning to be recognized by the symphonic musicians as something very important. In my own youth, I would go to the Newport Jazz Festivals and hear string quartets trying to play Miles Davis or something, or you laugh at these attempts, or symphony orchestras playing Duke Ellington, which is perfectly reasonable. Except the music that Duke Ellington wrote was not made for symphony orchestra, although he wrote symphonic pieces. What I'm saying here is the written music, those musicians could play it beautifully. Whether they swung or they didn't swing was of no importance, really. They could play the notes. What they couldn't do was improvise. They couldn't play what was not written. And this is the direction that many of us today are now living full-time, inspired by Pauline Oliveros largely, and inspired by many other people, especially in the Afro-American free jazz area, where musicians like Anthony Braxton, Wadada Leo Smith, and many others have not abandoned written music, but have discovered that there's a natural music existing simultaneously that can happen in the moment, anywhere, anytime, any place. And these two worlds are now living side by side. We're witnessing them day after day, minute after minute, right here at Big Ears. All kinds of stuff. Improvised, not improvised, written, not written, half written, or what have you. In all forms. With a beat, without a beat, with a melody, without a melody, drone music, rock music, beat music, scratch music, noise music, all of this. So whatever the form, these were the elements that a genius like Pauline understood to have no more need to make distinctions between the formal elements in the music, whether it was closer to classical, closer to jazz, closer to free music altogether, or closer to some more meditative tendency, as in drone musics, which Pauline liked very much and encouraged very much herself. Again, I hold myself here awaiting another question. I'm sorry.
Well,
Did you want to say something?
I think we'll soon. Before we just move on to introducing the rock piece, Alvin, I just wanted to ask you: is there Pauline sadly died at the end of last year? Is there a particular memory of her as a person that you kind of comes to mind when you remember her now? Can you paint us a little vignette?
Yes, I mean, actually, I performed with her a little about 10 months ago in Bologna, in Italy. She was a guest on a Musica Elettronica Viva program on a big festival there, and it was a very wonderful occasion again to see an 84-year-old woman of great energy, great spirit, just hauling a gigantic, heavy instrument like an accordion and putting it on, strapping it to her body, just to be able to tell you something about herself, to give you the gift of her own sound, even if she just would play one sustained tone or do one simple thing. And of course, she was a virtuoso accordionist. She could do anything. But this generational experience of seeing someone just a little bit older than me. I'm getting there myself, but how the profession, and I say profession, of music making was such a serious, life-giving act, day after day, hour after hour, minute after minute, in Pauline's life, and the extent that she would do anything, go anywhere, and she went to very strange places, in tunnels and grandiose, reverberant rooms, and all over the world, just to hear things that you couldn't hear anywhere else. But I think her real greatness was her ability to bring music out of anyone, out of anything, and how to bring people together with just a few instructions, a few indications, a few suggestions, and suddenly a room like us could just burst into fantastic song, as it were. Spontaneous music could just come out. And this, of course, is entirely experimental. None of us, if we were to do this right now, which I would love to do, but I can't because I've got to catch a plane. But if I could make you all create a sound right now, yeah, we can do this. We'll do it. Just for Pauline. You'll see what I mean. Okay, I'm going to put this microphone down. I'm just going to ask you quietly, just pretend no one is over there. We're just going to sing one tone. If you don't like that tone, sing another one. If you don't like it, breathe when you want, sing when you want.
Oh, brilliant. Instant music. Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you, everyone. Brilliant stuff. Well, no, don't get... Okay. Well, that was the audition. That was the audition. Now I'm going to invite Emily to tell us, because we're going to see these amazing, expansive practices and philosophies we've been just sort of getting a taste of here. We're going to see a little bit of them in practice right after this, and Emily is going to tell us more about this rock piece and how you can take part.
Briefly, because, now, and you have to get on a plane. I didn't realize that. Okay.
I've got a moment.
Okay.
Don't rush.
I wanted to do a few things. Everybody seems to be familiar, though, with Pauline's work a bit, and the deep listening practice, and her distinction between hearing versus listening, that hearing is a physical, auditory experience that happens in your eardrum, basically, and, listening is something different, related to the mind and the body and consciousness. So I'm really giving you a very boiled down version of this, but I highly recommend reading her deep listening practice text, deep listening, a composer's sound practice. It's a really amazing book. I found it very helpful to revisit it in the past few weeks in 2017. I think it's just so great to be thinking about the power of listening, there's no more important time than now to try to be listening to one another and understanding what's going on, also just to speak really. So within this deep listening practice, there's focal attention and there's global attention. Again, I think you can read a bit more of Pauline's definition of those two. Global attention would be right now that you're trying to listen to everything, so you're listening to me, but there's also lots of sounds that you are listening to. Focal attention is the attention that you're directing towards just me, my voice right now. And we go, the practice of deep listening, I'll read this because that kind of sums everything up, encourages the balancing of these two forms, focal and global attention, so that one can flexibly employ both forms and recognize the difference between these two forms of listening. So I also thought, well, yeah, let's try to do this. If you wanted to first have a moment with something called Earpiece, which is from 1998, one of Pauline's works. If you'd like to answer these questions in your mind, there's 12 questions. Number 1, are you listening now? Number 2, are you listening to what you are now hearing? Number 3, are you hearing while you listen? Number 4, are you listening while you are hearing? Number 5, do you remember the last sound you heard before this question? Number 6, what will you hear in the near future? This next one's my favorite. Number 7, can you hear now and also listen to your memory of an old sound? Number 8, what causes you to listen? Number 9, do you hear yourself in your daily life? Number 10, do you have healthy ears? Number 11, if you could hear any sound you want, what would it be? Maybe that's my favorite question, actually. Number 12, are you listening to sounds or just hearing them? So in a moment, we're going to, all together, I think there's enough rocks for everybody too. I'd like to try this piece. As Mr. Curran brought up, it's very difficult, actually. It's not an easy one. I think I was sort of convincing a lot of you to come and do it and be like, it'll be fun, it'll be great. And it's just a little rigorous, but we can do it. And I thought we would work our way into it. So Rock Piece is from 1979, and it was actually the idea for this, it was Jace Clayton's idea. I mean, he says it was my idea for it to come to Big Ears, but it was really his idea, I think. that he brought up in a talk that he was giving, and I thought it would be a good idea to include it here too. And then Ben Smith has been working on collecting the rocks. They're Tennessee rocks, and I think they have really nice resonant properties. I guess I wanted to share, as I've been thinking a lot about Pauline's work and her meditation practices, and also the idea of listening, that listening might be, is a thing that we do for survival. There's survival instincts involved in listening also. I have a little baby who's 9 months old, and his favorite thing to do is to take two objects and go, and to test the properties of them. It's a thing that babies do. And I wonder often, what is that? Is it, are we hardwired to do that? Is he trying to see if they might be objects that he could make fire out of? Or is it something that, why do we do that? Anyway, I like that this piece includes that element of making those sounds. So first, I'd like everybody to come in a circle that would like to participate, and we're going to warm up on another piece that's just a circular rhythmic exercise that's synchronized, so that when we go to rock piece, which is a practice of asynchronicity, we feel like we could go for that.